Chapter 27. Again, David yelled. I blew out a breath of frustration. This was going to be a bit much. I just kept my mouth shut. He had designed an obstacle course in an old barn. At first I was having fun, until he started with the training. He wanted me to combine both of my new skills. They will make you a lethal threat that not even their best hunters can touch, David said when we walked into the barn. He had me running the obstacle course and dodging knives, stones, actually anything he grabbed from the weapons area. An hour later I was tired. He knew I was still new with my abilities. He even said it would take a while for everything to come together, as my body adjusted to everything. So why was he pushing me so hard now? I'm done, David, I said as I stopped and turned to look at him. He had a blank look on his face. He just nodded, put the weapons away. I went and grabbed my water bottle, sitting on the floor, gulping my water down. Leaning back against the wall, the coldness felt good against my skin. I heard David leave the barn, and I let out a small sigh. Finally, a moment to myself. After a few minutes of steadying out my breathing, I got up and decided to treat myself to a nice hot bath. Plus, I knew I had to soak my muscles. I might have new abilities, but my body was still the same when it came to soreness for being overworked in such a short time. I walked into the house and didn't see David anywhere around. Shrugged my shoulders and went to the bathroom. Starting up the tub, I lit a few candles and some incense, and then got in. A soft sigh escaped my lips once I laid back and felt the heat on my muscles. Closing my eyes, I was recalling everything that happened to me within the past few months. One of these days, something has got to go right, I thought, as I made my way to the kitchen. Danny, I'm only trying to make sure you're prepared for what is about to happen eventually. I can't lose you, David said as he sat down next to me. Looking down at my food, I know he was right. The organization wasn't going to be playing nice. They went all out to get what they wanted. I know, and I'm using everything that I have in me. I can't force myself any more than I already am, I said, looking up at him. I know. I just worry about you, he said as his hand reached for mine. My hand met his halfway. For a moment we sat there looking into each other's eyes, searching for something. I could feel something brew between us, and it was more than just sexual chemistry. But what? I didn't know. Finish eating, and tonight I think a good movie to relax with is in order before tomorrow, David said as he got up. What's happening tomorrow? I have someone coming in to help you with training, was all he said as he walked into the family room. My heart sped up as something was brewing all right. I had a sinking feeling I wasn't going to like this friend or the training. Chapter 28. After an hour of warming up around the obstacle course, I sat down on the floor and leaned up against the wall. The coolness felt amazing on my overheated body. I also sucked down all the water that was in the water bottle that David gave me earlier. David let it slip last night that I should take an hour to warm my muscles up before his friend showed up. So I followed his advice this morning. I heard the door open and close quietly. I let my senses search the area. When you walk into the barn, I looked like I was unaware of what was going on, since my eyes were closed and I was leaning against the wall. But I had honed my skills in tracking by sound and smell. I thought I faintly heard some kind of fabric rustle, and then it hit me. I slowly inhaled, and my stomach dropped. My heart rate went sky high. I ducked to the left and rolled my body as I got my feet under me. I took off running. The fucker was using throwing knives at me, and he was actually trying to hit me. I didn't look back as I ran out of the barn and into the woods. I could hear him a good 30 feet behind me. Luckily, I was in the woods, so throwing those knives at me was going to be tricky. I kept darting between the trees as I kept running as fast as I could. How the hell am I going to get away from Daryl? And why did he bring Daryl here? They were going to have to answer these questions once this little game was done. Of course, I don't think to Daryl this was a game. He loved the thrill of the hunt. and I was giving it to him. Damn it. "Oh, my sweet Lil Hunter, you can't keep this up forever," he called out. I could hear the laughter in his tone, which spurred me on even more. I was going to have to cover my tracks and backtrack somehow. Then it dawned on me. I was thinking as a werewolf, not as a vampire. Now I know why David wanted me to work out for an hour before his so-called friend showed up. I needed my muscles to be warmed up. I leapt off the ground and landed on a high tree branch. I kept going zigzagging, jumping from tree branch to the other. As soon as I cleared the woods, I took off with my newfound speed, heading right for the barn. And that is when I heard a noise that chilled me to my bones. I outsmarted Daryl, and he was pissed. David was leaning on the wall inside the barn. The smile lit his whole face. I walked over to him, punched him square in the face, and walked towards the house, not saying a word. Standing in the shower, feeling the hot water run over my aching body, felt wonderful. I knew I was going to be sore for a day or two after this stunt. But the bright side to all of this was I beat one of the best werewolves at his own game. Standing in the shower, and the next minute I was being thrown onto the bed. "What the hell?" I yelled and saw a very angry werewolf standing there watching me. "You think you are better than me, mate?" he growled. And there it was, his shitty attitude. "No, I don't think, Daryl. I know I am," I said, getting off the bed. He cut me off before I could get dressed. He picked me up and kissed me before I could respond to anything. He let out a very low growl, and my insides responded to him. My legs wrapped around his waist, and I kissed him back. We spent the next hour having sex that was demanding, yet was also mixed with gentleness. Being with Daryl was definitely a roller coaster ride. Chapter 29. What I don't understand, David, is why bring Daryl here knowing full well that he wants me as his mate? I asked, sitting at the kitchen table. Daryl is one of my contacts. He keeps me in the loop of what the organization has been up to. He knew about us, and that once you were a hybrid, I was going to be working with you. So, you decided not to tell me about any of this. I wanted you caught off guard, but I see I was wrong. You have honed your other senses, David said as he sat there looking at me. I guess we all have our little secrets, I said, getting up. Where are you going? Daryl asked. Wherever I want, I said, and walked out of the room. I needed a moment to clear my mind. I was irritated at David for keeping things from me, knowing what was going on between Daryl and myself. But at the same time, I understood why he was doing what he was doing. Frustrated, I went outside and followed a small trail that was leading out into a section of the woods that I didn't notice before. Do you know how hard you are to track down? I heard a familiar voice ask. I kept walking, hoping if I just ignored it, the voice would go away. Danny, walking away and ignoring me won't work, he said as he appeared in front of me. I stopped and looked into those familiar eyes. What do you want, Ryan? I asked with a sigh. I want you to come back home, where you belong, he said, taking his fingers and tracing the side of my face. I leaned into his touch before I could stop myself. I missed his touch. Ryan, what was said at the ball and how you betrayed me is unforgivable, I said, looking deep into his eyes. I know. I called off the engagement, and I told the council that you were not a pawn in any game, that I want to marry you, he said as he looked down at me. Honest? I asked. A small part of me was unsure, but another part was hoping it was true. I watched as Ryan bit into his arm to draw some of his blood. Only way to tell if a vampire was telling the truth to another vampire. Our blood holds all the secrets of the past. As I sank my fangs down into his arm, drinking his blood, I saw everything unfold before my eyes. Ryan broke the deal that they had in place, and by doing so, it put Ryan right up there beside me as the most wanted subject. I let go of his arm and looked at him. No words were spoken as we stood there, looking into each other's eyes as the snow started to gently fall around us. For some silence in the woods could drive a person mad. And then there were the others that found comfort and peace in the stillness. "I want to marry you, Danny," he whispered as he leaned down and claimed my lips. I wrapped my arms around his waist as my body molded to his. I had tried desperately to forget how Ryan felt against me, how he tasted and smelled. But being here with him right now, I knew that one way or another I was destined to be with him. We broke the kiss, and he leaned his forehead against mine. "What are we going to do?" Ryan asked. "We go inside and talk with David and Daryl," I said. I knew this wasn't going to go over well, but right now, I didn't care. 3 of us were being hunted. Who knows about Daryl? But right now, I wanted and needed Ryan with me, and the other 2 were just going to have to accept it if they wanted me to stay here. Chapter 30. For the past 2 hours, I sat there and listened to all 3 guys argue about who was going to help me, who was going to marry me, and who was going to stay. I kept quiet the whole time, letting them get the steam out before I put my foot down and told them the way it was going to go. "Stop it!" I yelled. "This is how it's going to go. Ryan stays. He is my other vampire half, so he will work with me on that part. Daryl can help work on my werewolf side. David, this is your place, and you are a hybrid that can help me bring all of this together. I will not pick and choose. I am choosing all 3 of you. If you 3 cannot accept that, then I will leave all of you and go do my own thing, even if that means I get killed or captured," I said, sitting there looking at all 3. They sat there quietly. I could tell they were thinking it over. "I agree," Ryan said. "So do I," David said. "I agree," Daryl said. "Good. Now I'm tired and I'm going to bed," I said as I got up and went to my room. Shutting the door, I undressed and put on my nightshirt. I woke up feeling refreshed, stretching to see how my muscles felt, and nothing hurt. I could get used to this. After my shower, I decided to put on my usual clothes, black jeans, shirt. I decided I wanted to go out for a bit and see what was going on. Walking into the kitchen, all 3 guys turned and looked at me. I ignored them as I went to get a bowl of cereal. Sitting down at the kitchen table, I stayed silent as I finished my cereal. No one was talking, but it was creeping me out having Daryl, David, and Ryan all sitting there watching every move I make. I washed out my bowl. I turned and looked at them. "What?" "Where are you going?" David asked. "In a while, I'm going out to see what's going on," I said, getting a cup of coffee. "Do you think that is wise?" Ryan asked. "Nothing is ever going to be safe for me, and I can't just sit back and hide away." I was sitting down sipping my coffee. "Well, we can take turns going out with her," David said, looking at all of us. "That would give the organization exactly what they want, David," I said, looking at him. He knew what I was talking about. The organization wanted David, Ryan, and myself in their lab so they could dissect us and get us to do their dirty work. I was a hunter, but I never went after just anyone. Only the ones that broke the rules that each of the councils had set in place. The organization was the cleanup crew, basically. I didn't mind it. It helped with my night terrors, and I also got to work on my anger issues. For me, it was a win-win situation. Daryl is the only one not on the organization's list to hunt down. If I must take one of you with me, it has to be him, I said. I turned and looked at Daryl. "And if you turn me into the organization, I will rip you apart, and don't think I won't," I said with a tone that could cut glass. "Danny, no matter what you might think of me, I wouldn't ever turn you in or use you like Ryan did," Daryl said, sitting back. Ryan glared at Daryl for that remark, but didn't say anything. He couldn't, because he knew that statement was true. "What time did you want to head out?" Darrell asked. "I was thinking in about 10 minutes. I just have to do my hair," I said, getting up. I went back to my room, and after I put on my boots, I went into the bathroom. I decided to braid my hair and then put in a few pins. My knives went in their usual spots around my body and in my boots. I also had a few smaller knives in different spots that no one knew about. I had to make sure to start changing things up with my weapons. Too many hunters knew where I kept things, and that wouldn't do me any good in a fight. "I'm worried about you going out with Darrell," Ryan said. I looked at my reflection and saw Ryan was standing right behind me. I could see the worry in his eyes. He did not show emotion to many people. I was one of the very few lucky ones. "I'll be okay," I said, and turned around to face him. He bent down and tenderly kissed me. Chapter 31. "Danny, are you sure you want to do this?" Darrell asked as we made our way down the street. "They know I was supposed to give you a week of my time. Well, to them, this is what we are doing," I said quietly as I scanned the area. It was daylight, which meant most of the hunters were sleeping right now. Who knows about Tom? I haven't heard from him since I came back and we had that small meeting. "Well, if that is the case," Darrell said as he took a hold of my hand. I had to fight the urge to pull my hand away from his. If I was going to give him a week like I did Ryan, then I had to act the part and make it look like we were seeing if we could become mates. "Let's go in here," Darrell said as he pulled me with him. I glanced up and saw it was my diner. Warmth and good food. I could handle this. We sat down at my normal spot. The waitress walked over and smiled when she saw me, but glared at Darrell. I had to smile at that one. After we placed our order, Darrell sat there looking at me. I knew he was about to ask me a million questions about Ryan and myself. "What's on your mind, Darrell?" "How serious are you and Ryan?" he asked. How was I going to answer this one when I didn't know the answer? I'm not sure. Before everything, I was in love with him and was ready to settle down and spend eternity with him. Now we are taking it slow and getting to know each other on my terms," I said. The food and drinks arrived. While we ate, I noticed Darrell was lost in thought. But I was okay with that. I enjoyed the silence while I ate. After we finished eating, I sat back and sipped on my coffee. "I would like for us to seriously date, Danny. I know what I did to you was wrong, and I'm sorry for marking you the way I did. But I don't regret it. I know you are my other half. I've known this since I first saw you walking the streets a year ago." I looked up at him, but didn't say a word. I could see he was thinking about what to say. "You were so confident with your walk. I could tell you knew how to handle yourself. You still do. How you bested me out in the woods was amazing. Something about you calls to me, calls to someplace deep within my bones," he said as he reached for my hand. I met his halfway and put my hand in his. "Since we are staying together at Davin's house, and you will be with me when I go out, I don't see a problem with us trying the dating thing. But the house is neutral territory. You can't throw a fit if Davin or Ryan want to spend some time with me," I said, looking into his eyes. He nodded his head. "I can live with that, as long as on our walks we also go out on dates and spend some one-on-one time together," he said as his thumb rubbed small circles on the back of my hand. "That would be nice. I want to see the other side of you, Darrell, the side that many don't get to see," I said, smiling at him. We left the diner and walked around for a bit, looking in the windows of some of the stores. It felt good to get out of the house and no training. I just wanted to feel normal for a moment, and Darrell was acting like a perfect gentleman. I had to smile at the thought of us walking down the sidewalk, holding hands and window shopping. If the people around us only knew what we actually were, they wouldn't be smiling at us. In fact, they would be running the other way screaming. "I want to show you something," Daryl said. "Okay," I said, following him down a few side streets to a small building. I looked up as we went inside. We went to a door, and he pulled out a key. I smiled on the inside, knowing this is where he lived. He was trusting me this much, giving me information on where he usually was at. I had to give him credit. Once inside, his place was beautiful. Full of plants. They were artificial, but it still gave it warmth. I turned and looked up at him. "I wanted to show you where I lived, and I know you trust me, so I also wanted to show that I trust you also, Danny," he said as he stepped closer to me. I met him halfway, looking up at him, and mouthed a thank you. Within moments we were undressed and spent the next few hours making love to each other. We both needed this time together, without any interruptions. Chapter 32. The week went by quickly. I had training every day with Ryan in the morning, and in the afternoon I was out with Daryl on our dates. He still teased me off and on when we were walking around town. I didn't mind, since he was also showing me things that I missed, and how to use my werewolf skills while in the daylight. David would just sit and watch how I interacted with Ryan and Daryl. He hasn't said much to me lately, and that was a bit concerning. Saturday was my day of rest. No training, but just relaxing with the guys and enjoying the day. I went into the barn to do some stretches. "I see you and Daryl have become close," Ryan says. He stood there watching me. "I agreed to give him a chance, just like I did with you. It was only fair," I said. I put my music on and went over to the obstacle course. Ryan stood there while I did my thing, but I felt the air around me change. It no longer held any warmth to it. I stopped and looked around. Ryan wasn't standing where he was a few minutes ago. I put out my senses and didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. But that didn't mean the guys weren't up to something. My butterflies flared to life, and not in the good feeling, but that something is wrong feeling. I went over and grabbed a few knives, placing them inside my pants and one in my bra. I continued on with the obstacle course, keeping my senses on alert. I had this feeling that something wasn't right, but couldn't put my finger on it. I finished up, and as I went to get my water, something hit me in the shoulder. I turned around and saw Tom standing there by the door, along with Steve, who was holding a tranquilizer gun. I glanced at my shoulder and saw a dart sticking out of me. "You son of a bitch," I said as my eyes started to close, and I hit the ground. Chapter 33. My body felt like it was hit by a bat a few times. Every inch of me was sore, and I had a massive headache. Laying there, I tried to get my senses spread out to see what I could gather. Something was wrong. I couldn't sense anything other than the normal ones I had since birth. I opened my eyes and saw I was in a room that had a few candles lit in one corner. I was laying on a regular bed with only a sheet. I looked at myself and saw it was only my bra and underwear. What the hell happened? Then it hit me. Tom was standing there, and that jerk Steve who hit me with a dart. "I see you're finally awake, Danny. I didn't realize Steve double-dosed you with the tranquilizer," Tom said as he walked over to where I was laying. I didn't say a word. I just kept staring at Steve with enough hatred I hope he felt it coming off of me. Steve looked at me, but then looked away at the candles. He felt it, and he knew if I ever got out, I was going to kill him. "Who ratted me out?" I asked, turning to look at Tom. Tom turned and looked at me. Then he let out a sigh. "Davin did. He made a deal with the elders of this place. In exchange for you, he could live his life with no one hunting him," Tom says. He sat on the side of my bed. "I was wondering why he had changed towards me recently," I said, holding back the rage that started to boil inside me. I was sick and tired of being betrayed by the ones I trusted and loved. "So what happens now?" I asked. We know you have been training, so the offer on the table is you still work for us and accept certain assignments, or you will live permanently in the lab, and they will do experiments on you until you die, Tom said with a matter-of-fact tone. What about option 3? I move away and just live my life. Tom laughed a little with that statement. You really think that a highly trained hunter, who is now a hybrid, is going to live a normal life? Tom asked. It can happen, I said. You are too valuable to the organization, Danny. They will never let you go. It's best you just work for them, and you can still live your life. Tom says he stood up. I will work for them, but on one condition, I said, trying to sit up. What's that? Ryan isn't to be hunted, ever, I said, sitting up and looking Tom in the eye. Deal, Tom said as he left the room. Steve stood there for a moment and went to say something, but thought better of it. Just know this, Steve. I will kill you, I said in a deadly tone. His eyes grew wide, but then he smirked at me. Not if I kill you first, he said, and then left the room, shutting and locking the door behind him. I laid back, letting my body do what it needed to do. I just made a deal with the devil himself. But what they didn't know was I still had my plan that I had been working on. I kept that secret to myself. Trust wasn't an easy thing for me, and Dave proved why I kept secrets. I was going to have to deal with him, and that was one thing I wasn't looking forward to. The next came and went. No one brought me any food or drink. I slept most of it anyway. I needed my body to heal from whatever Steve did to it while I was unconscious. I woke up to my door being unlocked, and Tom walked in with a bag of clothes. He tossed them on the bed. You have your walking papers. You can go back to your apartment or wherever you wish to live. We also placed a tracker under your skin, so it won't matter where you go. We will find you. Also, your assignments will be sent to your phone, was all Tom said, and he left the room, leaving the door wide open. Chapter 34. Opening the door to my apartment, I could feel the emptiness that surrounded it. Closing the door, I walked in and looked around. Everything was right where I left it. After doing the normal checking on things, I went to the store and bought what I needed for at least a week. I had to get a hold of Ryan. Once the groceries were put away, I went about cleaning up the place. After that was done, I made a cup of coffee and sat down on the couch. I heard a knock on the door, and at this point, I was too tired to get up. Door's open, I yelled out, and I didn't care. I glanced up when the door opened, and I saw Ryan walking in with Daryl. Ryan walked over and sat down and pulled me onto his lap, hugging me tightly. I wrapped my arms around him and started to cry. Never in my life have I cried in front of anyone, but to have Ryan here, the tears wouldn't be held back. Sweetheart, what happened? Ryan asked, still holding me. I spent the next half an hour telling Ryan and Daryl what happened. That son of a bitch, Daryl growled out, and Ryan agreed with him. Until I can figure something else out, I have to hunt again, but my assignments will be coming over my phone. We will work with you, but in the shadows, Daryl said. I agree with him. You need to be protected, and there was no one better than the two guys in your life, Ryan said with a wink. That got a laugh out of me, but they were right. I knew with both of them I would be protected, and having my back watched felt good. Go get some sleep. Daryl and I will figure things out, so that way you know you're safe with us, Ryan said as he kissed the top of my head. I smiled at both of them, then got up and climbed into my bed. Closing my eyes, I let out a soft sigh. Things were about to get interesting, out in the hunting world, and in my apartment. Chapter 35. Hearing my phone go off, rolling over, I grabbed it off the nightstand. Assignment, Steve, was all it said. Shit, this wasn't going to be good. If I received this, then Steve received one for me. "This is just great," I mumbled as I got out of bed. I went to the kitchen and started up the coffee pot. Turning around, I saw Ryan and Daryl both sitting on the couch watching me. "Steve," I said as I walked to the bathroom. "What do you mean, Steve?" Daryl asked, getting up off the couch. "My assignment is Steve," I said as I started up my shower. I could hear Daryl mumble something. I took my shower, got dressed, but didn't add my knives just yet. Walking out to the kitchen, Ryan and Daryl were right behind me. "We need to talk about this, Danny," Daryl said as he sat down at the kitchen table. "What is going on?" Ryan asked, confused as to why Daryl seemed irritated. "Steve is one of the top hunters," I said, sitting down with my coffee. "Well, so are you," Ryan said, sitting down. "There's only one problem," Daryl said, looking at Ryan. "And that is?" "Steve doesn't play fair. He used a tranquilizer gun on Danny because he knows he is no match for her. So she got the hunting assignment. He got his hunt on her as well," Daryl said. "Also, where Steve goes, so does Dave," I said, rolling my eyes. "And that's a problem?" Ryan asked. "He forgets that I'm not full vampire that has been alive for a few hundred years, like he is, or a full werewolf that can transform into my beast, like Daryl. I might be a hybrid, but that still leaves me vulnerable right now. I'm still coming into my new skills. I might have trained and honed some of them, but I'm still a long way from being top predator. Dave and Steve are the top team amongst the hunters. They always travel together. So if Steve is going to be hunting Danny, then so is Dave," Daryl said with a slight growl. Daryl knew firsthand how Steve and Dave operated, and I knew I wasn't ready for both of them. Hell, one of them was going to be tough to kill. "When do you start?" Ryan asked. "It's already begun when I received my text," I said, letting out a sigh. "Shit," was all Ryan said. It finally had sunk in what I was facing. "Will they come here?" "No, homes are off limits, but out in the streets are fair game," I said. But then again, I wasn't sure anymore. I turned and looked at Ryan. "We need to move into your place. I need training when not hunting, and it'll be impossible for Dave and Steve to make it in there," I said. Ryan looked at me for a moment. I could see his brain kicking into gear what I was saying. That was one thing with Ryan. His security was extremely tight, plus inside his home was a maze. It would fit me perfectly. "Okay, let's pack up what you need from here and get you somewhere safe now," Ryan said, standing up. "I'll meet you there in an hour," Daryl said. I stood up and walked him to the door. "What are you planning?" "Something to make sure you stay alive. I plan on you being my mate for life," Daryl said as he bent down and kissed me. When I opened my eyes, he was gone. I turned and looked at Ryan. I could see he was getting ready for battle. Chapter 36. For 2 days I trained my ass off, honing my skills, combining both to where I was blending in perfectly. Ryan and Daryl both were coming after me. I never knew when they would. Only time that I was free from training was during my meals and sleeping. Ryan learned the hard way when he tried to scare me while I was sleeping. He almost got a stake to the heart. After that, I was allowed to sleep in peace. I knew Dave and Steve would be getting pissed the longer they couldn't find me, which I was betting they would get sloppy in their movements. After my shower, I stood there looking in the mirror and knew what I had to do. After I dressed, I went to the kitchen for breakfast. Ryan and Daryl were sitting at the table talking about where they would be. "Good morning," I said as I grabbed a bowl and filled it with my favorite cereal. I kept my back to them, but you could feel the air change in the room. "What did you do?" Ryan asked. "I love it. It fits you," Daryl said. I turned around and saw Daryl smiling at me, while Ryan kept blinking his eyes. "I wanted and needed a new look," I said as I sat down at the kitchen table. "So you chopped off all your hair?" Ryan asked. "I didn't chop it all off. It's just spiky now." I said with a wink. I did need a new style. I couldn't afford to have my hair grabbed. This way, it also wouldn't be an issue. Besides, they won't expect this. They knew how much I love my long hair, I said as I ate the rest of my cereal. What time are you heading out? Ryan asked, still looking at me like I grew a third eye. Once it gets dark out. It hasn't snowed in 2 days, so everything should be packed down. I plan on going through the alleyways after I walked around the main streets. Do you think that is wise? Danny'll be covered. I have my pack keeping an eye out, and they will warn her if Dave or Steve is close by, Daryl said, smiling at me. I'm going to go stretch and work out for a bit to loosen up my muscles. I got up and walked downstairs to the gym that Ryan had rearranged for my training. I put in my music and walked the track for a good 20 minutes. I knew they were both watching me. Thankfully, they left me alone. Daryl knew I needed this time to myself. I needed to go everything that I learned and also to center myself. After walking, I went to the weights and did another 20 minutes on those. Once I was done, I went to soak, one thing that I learned after all this training. It might be a hybrid, but I still needed to take care of myself. My body was still adjusting to everything, and I didn't need a sore or pulled muscle because I was being lazy. I want you to wear this, my little hunter, Daryl said as he handed me a vest. I could see that it was a bulletproof vest. Thank you for this, I said, knowing why he gave it to me. Dave and Steve were famous for using tranquilizers to catch their targets. I know they like to shoot people in the back. This way it'll give you some added protection, Daryl said as he helped me put it on. I finished dressing in my normal clothes, except this time I also added my shoulder harness for my gun. I never used this when I would normally hunt. Guns were useless when it came to werewolves and vampires, plus it drew attention to you. But Steve and Dave were human, with no special skills from what I knew, but with the organization and how corrupt they were. I wouldn't be surprised if they injected them with certain strains of either vampire blood or werewolf blood. It wouldn't kill them, as the venom would, but it would give them a small boost for a certain amount of time. The car ride to the city was quiet. Ryan was looking out the window while Daryl drove. Sitting in the back, I leaned back and closed my eyes. I got this, I kept repeating to myself. The tension in the car was palpable. I knew Ryan and Daryl weren't happy, but right now, I needed to do this. Once this was over, maybe I could escape the organization and live a happy, semi-normal life. Make sure to keep the earpiece in, Ryan said as he turned around and looked at me. For once in my life, I heard the fear in his voice. That shocked me. The Ryan I knew was a lethal vampire who did not fear anyone. But seeing the look in his eyes and the tone of his voice, I knew he was desperately trying to hide it. I promise I won't take it out, and I will be okay, I said as I reached for his hand. He took my hand in his and kissed the back of it. I need you to come back to me, he said against my hand. I smiled at him. I was going to try my darndest to come back, but I also knew there was a slight chance that I wouldn't. But that is what I've accepted the moment I became a hunter. You never knew one day to the next if you would live or die. We were sitting right outside of the city limits. I took a deep breath and centered myself. From this point on, I would be walking in. Thankfully, there was over 40 acres of land that surrounded the city. It gave me time to collect myself as I walked to where I wanted to go. We will be around. Also, we can communicate with our earpieces, Ryan said as he turned around to look out the windshield. I knew he was having a hard time letting me go. It was his nature since I was little to protect me. Now, he wasn't able to, and he had to fight that instinct to pick me up and carry me away. I looked at Daryl. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. I smiled at him and mouthed, "You're my mate," to him as I winked. I got out of the car before he would drive me back to Ryan's house and lock me away. The shock on his face when I said that, it was something he never thought he would hear me say. Chapter 37. Walking through the woods gave me time to relax and focus on what was about to happen. I knew Dave and Steve were always sneaking around town. Daryl was being given constant updates on their whereabouts. Thankfully, I had second thoughts on spending time with Daryl. I never would have guessed that I was even considering being with him as a mate. He always rubbed me the wrong way with his arrogance, but that week after we spent together, I saw a different side of him. Daryl was tender and loving. He was also loyal and fiercely protective. Everything I actually wanted in a partner. Ryan I had feelings for, but there was something still not connecting. "Everything okay, little hunter?" Daryl asked. I smiled at my nickname that he gave me. "I'm good, just on the outskirts now. Glad I wore this scarf to cover my breath. I was going to wait for a few minutes before I head into town," I said quietly. With this earpiece I could whisper and they would hear me perfectly. Leaning against a tree, I took my time to see if I could notice anything out of the ordinary. I didn't think I would, but sometimes taking a moment helps more than just walking into a situation. I heard a howl on the other side of town. By now, Steve and Dave should have guessed what was going on, but also knowing those two wouldn't even think about it. I glanced at my watch. It was close to 9 in the evening. Since the howl was on the other side of town, it would take them a good half an hour to get to the other side if they were walking. I walked the tree line until I was on the sidewalk, walking down Main Street, blending in with the other people walking around. This town was usually active on the weekends till midnight, which gave me enough time to see whatever else was going on. After a bit, I turned down a side street, bundled up if I was just a regular person going to where I needed to go. I heard another howl. This time, it was much closer. My heart rate started to go up. Taking a few deep breaths, trying to steady it. Something just didn't feel right in my bones. So I slipped into a store that sold women's clothing. I pretended to look at some clothes on a rack as I glanced out the storefront window. Dave walked by with Lisa. As they were holding hands, I noticed a slight bulge at her waist. That bitch was also in on the hunt, and she was carrying a gun. So this was how it was going to go. I spotted Dave and Lisa is also in on this now as well, I said quietly. "Shit," was all Daryl said. No other words were spoken as I kept walking around. I purchased some gloves after 10 minutes in the store. I asked the saleslady if I could use their bathroom. She agreed and told me where it was. Once inside the bathroom, I went into the stall and sat down. I had to figure this out. Lisa always held a grudge against me since I made the hunters, and she was denied. But for the organization to allow this was unacceptable. Since there were no rules to this hunt, then I was now going to play by my rules. "Time to do as we want," I whispered as I flushed the toilet, making people think I was using the bathroom. "I love how you think," Daryl replied. "Is this a good idea?" Ryan asked. I heard those two bicker back and forth for a good 2 minutes. "Shh," I whispered, and instantly both stopped their bickering, at least over the earpiece. I opened the door to leave and came face to face with Lisa. Chapter 38. "Isn't this interesting?" she said with a sly tone to her voice. "What do you want, Lisa?" I asked, pushing past her. "To see you dead," she whispered with a smirk on her face. "Too bad you can't do it. Probably why you couldn't make it as a hunter," I said with a smirk of my own. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but I did have a habit of having no filter when words came out of my mouth. "You little bitch," Lisa said as she walked towards me. I laughed, knowing that if she touched me in the store, that she would be killed by the organization. They at least had a strict policy when it came to certain things. "What's the matter, Lisa? Got to tag along on someone else's hunt?" I said with a light laugh. I knew I was pushing her buttons, but with Lisa, she got sloppy when she got mad. One of the main reasons why I was doing this, she was about to slip up with either information or else try something right here in the store. I must have struck a nerve with my comment. Lisa's face got red, and she kept opening and closing her mouth, wanting to say something. But then I spotted it and smiled. "Tell Dave that his little bitch is about to die," I whispered as I got close enough to her earpiece. I knew I was already being hunted by the organization. This was their way of trying to get rid of me. Plus, now we were playing by my rules. I winked at her as I started walking out of the store. I turned around and saw her look down at her shirt. She didn't realize that I had pierced her heart with the needle that I had. It also had a numbing solution on it. She didn't feel a thing. I was long gone by the time the siren started. I walked to my diner and sat down at my usual spot. The waitress rushed right over. "Danny, you are being hunted. Be careful," she whispered as she handed me my coffee. I smiled at her. "Thanks," I said. I put a test strip in my coffee and saw it was normal. "No offense to you, but when you're being hunted, you can never be too careful," I whispered. She nodded and walked towards the counter. I felt a familiar presence enter the diner. I sat back and smiled. "That didn't take you too long, Tom," I said, sipping my coffee. Tom walked over and sat down. He had a mixed look on his face. If I had to guess, it was relief and anger rolled together. "Danny, you can't go around killing whoever you wish," he said. "Really? Last I knew, hunters didn't go after other hunters unless specified from the organization, because they went rogue." "I didn't go rogue," I said, looking into his eyes. "So tell me, Tom, why am I being hunted by 3, oh sorry, now 2 hunters?" "The organization sees you as a threat, Danny," he said it with a sigh. "Bingo! I was coming back as a hunter for them. So tell me, Tom, who suggested that I was a threat?" I asked. "Davin," Tom said. I heard the door chime and smiled when Tom's face fell. Daryl, Ryan, and about 20 other werewolves that were a part of Daryl's pack walked into the diner. Daryl sat down on one side of me, and Ryan sat next to Tom. "Look at us, one big happy family," Daryl said, looking at Tom. "I don't want any trouble," Tom said quietly. "I know, Tom, but you see, I didn't want to be hunted by what I used to think was my family," I said. I waved at the waitress and ordered a plate of fries. Ryan and Daryl ordered their food as well. I planned on staying here for a bit. I needed to warm up, plus I was hungry. "You accepted to become part of Daryl's pack, didn't you?" Tom asked in surprise. "Is that really any of your business?" I asked. "No, it's not, but I find it interesting that Ryan and Daryl are working together to protect you. That only means that you have accepted both of their proposals," Tom said with a smile on his face. His smile reminded me of a dad who was proud of his daughter's choices. I had to shake that thought off. Tom wasn't a father figure anymore to me. He once was, but now that he was with the organization, he lost that right. Tom got up to leave and turned and looked down at me. "Just be careful, Danny. Dave will be out for blood now that you killed his wife," Tom said and walked out of the diner. So those two got married. Makes sense now that they are walking hand in hand. "Oh, well," I says the waitress brought my plate of fries. Chapter 39. The 3 of us sat there eating our food. I could hear the others talking and laughing. I glanced over at Daryl and saw he was smiling. "What's got you in a good mood?" I asked. "Listening to my pack. They like you, and seeing us together makes them happy," Daryl said quietly. I glanced around and saw so many faces smiling at me. I smiled back at them. I could get used to this, having a large family, being with the man that I loved, and he loves me. I stopped eating and realized what I just said to myself. Did I love him already? I wasn't about to say anything to him until I knew for sure that I was in love with him. Right now I had to make sure to take out Dave and Steve. Speaking of which, I wonder where they are now. I heard the door chime and the room went silent. I didn't want to turn around. "Danny, get your ass outside now," Dave yelled. I took a breath and slowly let it out. I stood up and turned around. I saw Dave stand in the doorway. He was beyond pissed. "No, Dave, I won't. You and Lisa brought this on yourselves by sticking your nose into the hunt," I said calmly, even though I didn't feel it. I had to make sure I betrayed it. "You killed my wife." "No, she killed herself," I said, raising my voice. "I'm going to hunt you down," Dave yelled back at me. I stood there for a moment. I could see he was distraught, and I didn't blame him on that one. But when you become a hunter, you accept that shit will hit the fan at some point if you survive long enough. "Go home and take care of your business, Dave. You are in no shape for what is to come if you keep going down this path." He started to walk into the diner. Everyone surrounded us. Dave and I stood there facing each other, but kept 10 feet between us. "This ends tonight, Danny," Dave said in a tone that was filled with rage. "Yes, it will, Dave," I said with a sigh. I did like Dave and Steve, but they were given the okay to hunt me. I learned a long time ago to put personal feelings aside when a hunt came up. You had to survive it. Dave left the diner, and I sat down watching Steve and Dave stand there staring right back at me. I knew they wouldn't leave until I left the diner. "Well, if they're going to double team, why don't we?" Daryl asked me. I turned and looked at him. I didn't see a reason why not. "I need a distraction so I can get out of here and make them actually hunt me," I said quietly. Daryl smiled. "That we can do," he said, and called his pack over to the table, making sure to talk in low tones and keeping his back to the window. "Danny, I don't like this," Ryan said, taking a hold of my hands. "I don't either, Ryan, but what else am I supposed to do? Let them kill me? Besides, that is what they got going on," I said. "Let me see what I can do," Ryan said, and before I could say anything, he was outside in front of Steve and Dave. I stood there holding my breath. I made sure Ryan wasn't on the hunt list, but that could change at any moment. He was a powerful vampire, but he could still be killed. "What is he doing?" Daryl asked when he turned around. "I don't know, but I got a bad feeling," I said as I stood up. I could hear them arguing over something. Before I could react, Dave pulled out a gun and shot Ryan in the head. Ryan fell back, which gave Dave enough time to stake Ryan in the chest and sever his head. Dave held up Ryan's head and grinned at me. Chapter 40. My eyes went from unfocused to clear in a matter of seconds. I knew I was screaming, and Daryl was holding me. He wasn't about to let me run outside right into Dave and Steve's sight. They were hoping I would do that, but Daryl was making sure I stayed right there. The rest of the pack went outside and grabbed Ryan's body and his head. Steve and Dave backed off, knowing with this many werewolves that they would be killed in a heartbeat. Once inside, Daryl let me go. I ran over and wrapped my arms around Ryan's body. I knew there was nothing I could do to bring him back, but I still needed to hold him close. A single tear escaped as it caressed my cheek. I looked up and saw Dave standing outside with a smirk, but Steve looked sad. He was shaking his head with his eyes cast downwards. I laid Ryan's body down gently. Standing up, I let out a deep, low growl. I was out of the door before Daryl could stop me. That rage that was inside of me, bursting forward out of me. Steve's eyes grew wide as he started to back up quickly. Dave was frozen in fear as I was walking towards him. The rules that were in place that I lived by were no longer relevant to me. I didn't care anymore about who or what was around me. I let out a sound that I never heard before, but somehow I was making. I grabbed a hold of Dave and ripped him apart, throwing his limbs away from me. Once I was finished, I turned towards Steve, who stood there, shooting his tranquilizer darts at me. I snarled and took off towards him. He dropped the gun and started to run away from me, screaming. Steve's scream brought out every creature that lurked in the darkness, and they started to go after him. As the creatures that were made in nightmares descended upon him, I slowed down. They could devour him when they caught him. I turned and saw my reflection in the store glass. At first, I didn't recognize myself until Daryl stood beside me in his werewolf form. We were close to the same height. My body was covered in fur that was as dark as the night sky. My eyes were a vibrant yellow. I looked back and forth between myself and Daryl, not understanding what had happened. Once I heard the death cry from Steve, I let out a sigh, knowing he was dead. I looked back at my reflection and saw I was back to my human self. I looked up at Daryl, who was still in his werewolf form. He picked me up and carried me back to his home. I knew females were not given the gift to change forms, but somehow I was able to? Was it due to the rage that I had built up inside of me? I was going to have to talk to Daryl about it after I rested. I felt Daryl lay me on a soft bed, covering me up with a light blanket. "What happened, Daryl?" I asked. "I think with you being a hybrid with enough rage in your system, your body responded with what it could do. Somehow you can change, which makes you extremely rare. In fact, one of a kind," Daryl says. He sat down next to where I was laying. "I need to go into hiding, Daryl. The organization will definitely want me in their labs or kill me on the spot." Daryl nodded his head. "Give me a day to figure something out. In the meantime, you are safe here," he says. He leaned down and kissed me on my forehead. I closed my eyes and the images of Ryan kept playing through my mind. I couldn't stop crying until there was no more tears. I could feel myself starting to drift off, and I let myself fall. I woke up to the sun streaming through the window. Laying there, I kept the images and thoughts of Ryan locked away for now. I couldn't afford to fall apart right now, not until I was safe and far away from this city. Daryl walked over and handed me a cup of coffee. Smiling at him, I sat up and gladly took the coffee. I sat there in silence, sipping it. I took Ryan's body to his home, where he would be put into his final resting place. Also, after talking with the remaining vampire elders, they gave me this sealed envelope that is addressed to you, Daryl said as he laid the envelope on my lap. I let it sit there as I was drinking my coffee. I saw my name on it in Ryan's handwriting. I wasn't sure if I was ready to read what he wrote just yet. Daryl got up and went into the other room. Knowing him, it was to give me some space. I took a breath and set my cup down on the nightstand. With a shaky hand, I picked up the envelope. It was Ryan's seal. Tracing it with my fingers, I carefully opened the envelope, making sure not to break the seal. Pulling out a piece of paper, I knew it was a letter that Ryan wrote. "My sweet Eternal, if you are reading this, then by some misfortune I am no longer around. I have watched you grow into an amazing, beautiful woman that I want to spend eternity with. After you have agreed to be turned, I knew right then and there that all my wishes and dreams come true. I was going to spend eternity with a woman who was my other half. Now the hard part, with me no longer around, I cannot keep you safe from the nightmares that plagued you so badly. Maybe Daryl can learn to help in that area. Also, I leave you my entire estate, our home. My Eternal is yours and Daryl's. It is big enough for the pack to live there alongside you both. Please do this for me, my Eternal. I've spent long hours talking with Daryl about my wishes. He has agreed to them as long as you wish to. This letter is the hardest thing that I have done, my Eternal. I only wish that I could spend one more day with you. Daryl knows my wishes on where I am to be kept. Trust and love him, my Eternal. Forever, your eternal husband, Ryan." I held the letter to my chest and screamed and cried for an hour. I let every emotion out that I was trying so hard to keep inside of me. The dam broke after that letter. Daryl stayed at the doorway, watching me fall apart. He was wanting for me to let him know that I needed and wanted him with me. I held my hand out to him, and he was beside me in a heartbeat, holding on to me as I cried. Clutching the letter, I closed my eyes and drifted off in Daryl's arms. Epilogue. Daryl and I spent the next week moving into our new home. The pack was moving in with us the following week. Ryan was right. This home was large enough. It held over 30 rooms and 30 bathrooms. Each room had its own bathroom, thankfully. This house sat on 300 acres. Most of it was wooded. It had state-of-the-art security. I would keep the security that Ryan had. I spent time talking with them, and they assured me that Ryan already talked to them, and they would honor Ryan with protecting me and mine. The organization was in a state of unrest after word got out that they went back on their word and sent hunters after another hunter, also hunting one that was on a do not touch list. Tom had retired and disappeared. I figured in time he would reach out to me when it felt it was safe enough to do so. No one knew where Ryan's actual home was located, but word got out that I was at the organization's top capture or kill on sight list. In time, I knew they would have to go out and start hunting down every last hunter and elder the organization list. But for now, I was content at learning pack life. Daryl has been amazing with teaching me all the ins and outs of it. Actually, everyone in the pack has been helpful, and they all agreed that I was their alpha along with Daryl. That had me laughing when Daryl rolled his eyes. Ryan's remains were in a tomb on the property that I would visit every day. I would always bring roses to a place at the door, sitting there for a few hours at a time, telling him everything that was going on and how I missed him. I wouldn't ever forget what Ryan had done for me all my life and the gift he gave me. Life of immortality was something that I wasn't going to waste. I flopped down on the bed, and Daryl laughed when I buried my face into my pillow. Tomorrow was going to be a long day, but one that I was looking forward to. The whole pack was moving in. I felt Daryl get out of bed. I moved a little and saw he was standing beside the fireplace that was going. How did I miss that? I thought. Danny, Daryl said in a tone that made me sit up. I looked at him with a bit of confusion. He smiled at me as he walked over to where I was sitting. I know things have been hectic around here and in life for the past while, but I want to ask you something. Ask away, I said, watching him. I'm in love with you, Danny, and I want us to be mated, Daryl said as he pulled out a ring. I looked down and saw a beautiful ruby and sapphire stones circled in a black diamond. I'm in love with you. Also, I would love to be mated to you, I said as he slipped on the ring. Daryl tackled me in with a hug that felt amazing. We spent the rest of the night making love, laying in his arms, watching the sun come up. I felt myself relax enough to start to fall asleep. All of a sudden, the bedroom door flew open. Danny, there's a letter for you, and I feel that's important, one of the guards said as he handed the letter to Daryl. The guard left, but I knew he was standing guard outside the door. I took the letter and opened it. Danny, as you know, I've retired from the organization, but I still have ears and eyes out there that keep me informed of things. Word has it that the organization has made a truce with the vampires. This truce will only last if they engage in the hunt for you. The vampires have agreed to come after you. Be safe, Danny. Tom. Can I ever catch a damn break? I growled and handed the letter to Daryl. Shit, this isn't good, Daryl said as he got up and opened the door and looked at the guard. How many guards left? Daryl asked. All the vampire ones left. They said they are not going to get involved because of Ryan, but they will not put their life on the line, the guard said. Thankfully, this guard was a werewolf. Guard the doors and have teams sweep the property, set up new stations and monitors and lights everywhere. Attach UV lights with them. They may not die, but it will give them one hell of a headache, Daryl said. The guard nodded and went to talk with the rest of the guards. I was laying in bed, listening to everything. How long can we stay here? I asked, sitting up. We can fortify this place and stay here for at least a good 3 months before things can fall apart. Okay, good. That will buy us enough time to set things in motion, I said as I stood up and walked to the window. Ryan had all the windows bulletproof, which was a good thing now that I was on everyone's radar. Daryl walked up behind me and wrapped his arms around me. Leaning into his chest, I sighed. 3 months to move and to kill every hunter and vampire around, I said as the sun was rising above the trees. The next 3 months were going to get very interesting around here. I just hoped that the pack was ready for what was about to come knocking at the door. Thank you for listening. That was the book Fate's Dance, Book 1 of the Fates Hybrid series. The second book will be out this year, sometime in 2023. Until then, make sure you like and subscribe and follow along as new books will be read.